Hi, everyone. This is the Foundations of Reading webinar. My name is Dr. Mike Gentile, and I developed this webinar along with Dr. Amanda Marcotte. We're both affiliated with the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the College of Education there. This webinar was funded by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The goal of this webinar is to provide a resource that covers as many topics as possible that may be included in the Foundations of Reading MTEL solely for the purpose of passing the MTEL. Now, there could be a lot of great reasons to learn all of these topics, and the goal of this isn't going to be to make you into an amazing teacher of reading. When we do this at UMass, the topics that we cover in this webinar actually are going to cross over multiple semesters of courses. So it's a huge amount of information. So what we're trying to do in this webinar is distill that information into as small a chunk as possible so that we're only giving you things relevant to passing the MTEL. So if you're wondering, if you're an experienced teacher of reading and you're wondering why something isn't covered on the MTEL or covered in this webinar, it's because it is de-emphasized in the MTEL and not necessarily something that we don't think is very important. We developed a study guide to go along with this presentation, and I strongly encourage you you should have access to a link to the study guide. So I strongly encourage you to follow along. There's going to be information included in the study guide that's not going to be on the slides. So you should really try to use both. Here's what the study guide looks like. You can see here, and it more looks like something you can print it out if you want. I'd appreciate feedback on it. But you can see it's going to be organized with more explanations of terms and things like that, things that I might not cover in the webinar. So again, I highly suggest if you hear me say a term and I don't fully explain it, come back to the study guide and review the key terms for that section. I'm going to start off introducing this by just talking about the MTEL itself. So Pearson develops the MTEL for Foundations of Reading, and here's what they say it's about. The Foundations of Reading measures teacher candidates' foundational knowledge of skills in the science of reading related to the development, instruction, and assessment of literacy. FOR focuses on these essential components of reading development and evidence-based practices identified by reading research. So Pearson has say that when we put out all of the questions in the FOR, these are the things that we're going to be focused on: development of reading, instruction of reading, and assessment of reading. And so you can see that when the MTEL, as we go through the questions, they're all going to be about one of these three things. How does reading actually develop? How do you actually teach those things? And then how do you make assessment about those things to know whether you taught them well or not, right? Not going to lie, folks find Foundation of Reading challenging. I think it's for two main reasons. First is the breadth of the content covered. Like I said earlier, this is content that we cover in 2 semesters of 3 credit courses at UMass Amherst. So it touches a lot of concepts and technical language, and it's just a lot. 2, it's going to ask you to analyze complex literary and informational texts in addition to that early development stuff. It also talks about oral language and writing strategies that support reading, as well as academic language development, which of course is a focus of English language learners, and spelling development. And all of that is a lot of information. It also does not just talk about the breadth of all of the topics, but the depth of them as well. So as I just said, it's going to cover all of those topics, but also from the perspective of English language learners, also from the perspective of students experiencing a difficulty in a particular area of reading, also from the perspective of students with a special need in reading, and as well as enhancing advanced skills or one or more areas of reading, right? So you have to not only have a sense of all of these topics and how they all develop, are taught, and are assessed. But how does the perspective of ELs and students with disabilities uh, affect those things as well? So it's a lot. It's an enormous amount of stuff. So this is going to force you not only to just memorize terms, it's going to have you ask questions that force you to apply what you know. So you need to go on move from not just a basic understanding. You can't just do a flashcard memorization. You need to be able to take these concepts and picture what they look like in the classroom. So it is a high level of expertise that they're expecting to answer many of the questions in FOR. Okay. As for the test itself, here's a link to it. If you have access to this PowerPoint, you can click that link. It'll take you to the website. Foundations of Reading is test 190. You might see an older version where it was just 90, but it's been a couple of years now where this isn't really an issue of confusion for people anymore. So, but you should find Foundations of Reading 190 and register for that. If you go in person to a test-based center, it should take about 4 hours to complete. If you register for a remote version of the test, it takes about 4.5 because you have to do all this setup and security that goes along with it. When we get to the scoring, just know that you need a 240 to pass. It costs $139, and you can use this link right here to find professional centers. These are some centers that we've used in the past. So you can do this and find a test center if you want to do it in person. I would personally recommend doing it in person. I find that my students have, if you have the option, of course, my students have more success doing it in person than they find that when they do the remote, you have somebody staring at you the whole time. It's a little bit more anxiety producing. But of course, there are plenty of good reasons to do a remote viewing. So if that's your situation, do that as well. But if you're 50-50, I would strongly consider doing it in person. All right, the test is, let me move my face here. The test is comprised of 4 different sub areas. The first is the foundations of reading development. And you can see that that's going to compose about 43 to 45 out of 100 multiple choice items. So there is heavy, heavy, heavy weighting on the foundations of reading development. If there's one thing you're going to get right, it should be foundations of reading. In fact, if we do the math and you nail your foundations of reading piece and you get almost all of these questions right, you can basically flip a coin for the rest of the test and you'll probably pass. So that's how heavily weighted foundations of reading is. The next piece is the development of reading comprehension. This is going to be things where we talk about narrative and versus informational text. You can see that there's still some significant weighting here, but definitely clearly not as much as foundations of reading. And lastly, the last 20-ish questions on the test will be concerning reading assessment and instruction. And for both reading assessment and instruction, there's going to be a lot of overlap in concepts in foundations of reading. And so you'll find that studying foundations of reading and development of reading are often going to give you almost all of the vocabulary necessary to answer questions in reading assessment and instruction. And where, of course, that's not true, we'll provide you that vocabulary. And lastly, the sub area, integration of knowledge and understanding. That is what they refer to are calling the open response items. And you will have 2 open response items, and we'll have a separate video to review those. So the sub areas are then further broken down into objectives. So foundations of reading is going to cover objectives 1 through 4. I'll show you those in a second. And again, the approximate weight, factoring in the open response, is about 35% of the test. Sub-area 2, composed of objectives 5 through 7, is 27. And then the last 2 objectives, 8 and 9, are composed of just 18% of the test. In total, the 100 multiple choice questions in foundations of reading is weighted at 80% of the test, and integration of understanding the open response questions are weighted at just 20% of the test, which is why I'm going to strongly emphasize your study time be weighted heavily towards sub-area 1, not as much towards these areas that are weighted less. So here are the questions and how basically your goal is to get to 240. So your question is, how do I get to 240? So let's take a look here, right? If I get about 75, we'll start here, 75 multiple choice questions correct. So up to 3/4 of the multiple choice questions correct or less, I'm going to get a 194. So between 71 and 75 is going to get me a 194 plus this. So the open responses are scored 1 through 4, which is why the lowest 1 plus 1 is 2, and the highest 4 plus 4 is 8. And then these are the combinations between them. So even if I do, let's say, I get a 3 and a 2. So, I do fine on one of the open responses, 3 out of 4, and then a 2, which is, reasonable. I maybe broadly answered the question, but certainly still missing a lot in the open response. So a 2 and a 3 gets me a 48. And then if I answer only 71 out of 200 multiple choice questions, 48 plus 194 is going to get me to 242, which is a pass, right? So when we're thinking about, I want to help you reduce your test anxiety, and I don't want you to feel bad if you miss a question, you come across a question you don't know, or you're really unsure how to answer the open response. You can afford to get questions wrong in the MTEL and not be in any danger of not passing. Okay, it takes quite a bit. You have to have quite a large gap in your knowledge to miss so many questions and so much open response that that you don't pass. Which means the good news is that if you put in the work and you put in the study time, such as watching this webinar, we're going to get you to the point where you can pass quite confidently. Here's the outline of the webinar. You're watching the introduction video now. The next video, we're going to talk about Objective 1, which is phonological phonemic awareness, etc. The next video will be Objective 2, and so on and so forth until we get the end here, where we'll start to combine some objectives for videos. And then the final video will be on the open response questions. All right, we will pause here for now, and I'll see you in the next video.